This is the appointed time. We have a quorum. I call the meeting to order. This meeting will finish at 7 p.m. If necessary, I will at maximum extend the meeting by 15 minutes. Let me remind members that if there is any direct or indirect pecuniary interest between your good self and items under discussion, please disclose the nature of the interest before you speak under Rule 83A of the ROP. Also, please pay attention to voting arrangements of items with direct pecuniary interest under Rule 84 of the ROP. First, item FCR 2018-19, number 73. Well, on the in meeting on the 19th of December 2018, we have already started discussion of this item. This is about the recommendation to create 2 permanent posts of Principal Government Counsel, one each in the Civil Division and the Law Drafting Division of the DOJ to better cope with substantial increase in workload. Well, we have already, members have asked for separate voting. In the Establishment Subcommittee, we have already spent about 2 hours on discussion of this meeting, and last time we have already spent 1 hour 25 minutes on this item. And so far 9 members have spoken. Next, Ms. Priscilla Leung. I speak in support of the creation of Principal Government Counsel under Civil Division and the Law Drafting Division of the DOJ. I do agree that they need to increase manpower of the DOJ. It's been 21 years since the reunification. There has been an increasing number of legal issues that have to be dealt with. And we have to take into account changes in our circumstances and the need to legislate. In recent years, in relation to number of torture claims, has been increasing. Courts have been complaining that there is not sufficient manpower to cope. If the DOJ can recruit more people to alleviate the building up of workload and backlog, I have already asked the Secretary for Justice to come to explain to us in a panel meeting. The Chief Justice has already spoken that he would like the Secretary for Justice to look into ways to reduce backlog. I think we should lose no time to create these 2 posts. And I even think that the 2 are not enough. Perhaps the Department of Justice can explain to me whether these 2 posts alone suffice and whether they need to, in the future, create more posts. Mr. Siu, thank you for the question. First of all, I'd like to thank members for their support of our proposed creation of the 2 posts. It's our stance that when we propose to create new posts, we would vigorously review the increase of workload, complexity, and it's only after when we have identified a genuine need, and it's only after we have made internal deployment and found that there is a genuine need that we would come to you to ask for a creation of posts to increase manpower. In the past, there has been an increase of non-directorate posts to support our work. What we can see is that in relation to these 2 posts, at the rank of a Principal Government Counsel, the establishment has remained unchanged since 1980. However, the complexity of the work and the volume of workload has been increasing, so we do need to have 2 more posts. I suggest that the DOJ should seriously consider this, that is to recruit people not as high as Principal Government Counsel. I do understand that it would take time to train someone even within the DOJ, so you need to consider your entire establishment. Say, for example, in 3 years down the line, are there people with experience? Because of a complexity of cases, you can't just walk into the DOJ and start taking over cases. You have to identify potential candidates, whether they are fresh graduates or those within the department for promotion. You have to make preparations for your succession. And this is necessary to meet future needs. I teach in one of the law schools, one of the 3 law schools, but this is not related. I just hope that you will have manpower with sufficient experience, because our experience is that you don't have people with sufficient experience. You need to give them time to accumulate experience before you allow them to take up cases. Let's hear if the DOJ has anything to say. Director, we will enhance our training so that our new recruits will get a sufficient training so that they can take up the job in the end as Principal Government Counsel. Mr. Gary Fan speaking for the second time. I would like to follow up on questions I asked in the first round. That is the distribution of work in the DOJ. Well, they said that there has been a number of judicial cases. I asked for more information to justify the Principal Government Counsel created under Civil Division. I asked also about work related to judicial review involving the Town Planning Board. The answer I got was that these cases are taken up by the Planning, Environment, Lands and Housing Unit and not the Civil Division 1. When I asked about judicial review of town planning cases and the percentage of the overall number of judicial review, interestingly, I've heard 2 answers. The first time, they said 30 to 40%. You can listen to the recording. And the second time, you said 3 to 4%. So it's a huge difference. So I would like to get a confirmation. And in relation to the number of outstanding judicial review, and in 2017 there is still about 903 cases outstanding. So how many of them is to be taken up by Civil Division 1? And how many of them will be handled by the Planning, Environment, Lands and Housing Unit as opposed to the Civil Litigation Unit? Who is to take the question? Ms. Cheung? I thank the member for a second chance to clearly explain about the distribution of work. In relation to cases involving the Town Planning Board, including litigation as well as advice, is taken up by the Planning, Environment, Lands and Housing Unit. You will find the information in the enclosure in relation to the nature of this unit. Well, town planning cases are taken up by the litigation units as well. There are about 4% of judicial review cases. Sorry, it was my bad that I have misread the figure. Instead of 40%, it's actually 4%. There is such distribution simply because of the types of cases. They are not taken up by the litigation unit. It's because it's something to do with lands and town planning. We need experts to deal with these special cases. That's why there is this distinction. So for Civil Litigation Unit 1, say for example 903 cases in 2017, how much do they take up? The percentage is higher than the cases taken up by the Planning, Environment, Lands and Housing Unit. Well, the figure 903, this year it has gone up to 1,400 or so cases, including those involving Town Planning Board, that is judicial review cases. That is the grand total. So the out of the 1,130 cases, how many of them is taken up by the Civil Litigation Unit in terms of percentage? I'll defer to my colleague, Ms. Wong. I think it's about 10%, 90% of them. Will be dealt with by, one of them is about 10% of the cases that will be taken up by the Planning, Environment, Lands and Housing Unit. Well, there are 3 members who have indicated to speak, but only one is present. I ask members to come down here for the vote. Mr. Holden Chow, thank you. I support the creation of these posts. We have seen that, whether it's in terms of number of cases and the complexity, I do see that they are both increasing. There is a minor question. Paragraph 26 of the paper, it says that, in relation to the increasing complexity of commercial cases and cases involving financial matters, there is a need to increase the post of law draftsman by 1. And there is in relation to anti-terrorist financing and also money laundering. I would like to ask, there is the rise or increasing use of cryptocurrency. It may give rise to many different crimes. A lot of those deception cases involve cryptocurrency. So do you have any plans to recruit more? Is it the case that, there is already a legal framework to monitor trading of cryptocurrency? So far, I understand that there is no proper legal framework to regulate cryptocurrency. Who is going to take the question? Director?
For this question, when it comes to issues like cryptocurrency, it's a matter of the relevant bureau forming policy and then that policy being something that's passed in the form of drafting instructions to the Law Drafting Division. So I think it forms just one of many areas of complexity that we would expect into the future, seeing drafting instructions provided to the Law Drafting Division.
Ms. Elena Wong, 5 minutes. The creation of these posts, one of the major duties taken up is to deal with law drafting. So in relation to the new assistant law draftsman, is that responsible independently for major law drafting duties according to paragraph 26? What are the other major law drafting duties that they will require? DLD, Ms. Johnson.
I thank the member for this question. The duties of the proposed role will reflect the same generic duties as apply for the 2 existing deputy law draftsmen. They will cover 2 areas, effectively the drafting area, where it will be personal drafting of particular legislation, but probably more prominently the supervisory role in relation to the work of a particular subdivision within the Law Drafting Division in terms of providing guidance to the drafters in that subdivision and constantly reviewing the legislation that is being prepared. So ensuring the quality of the legislation prepared within Subdivision 3. That would be the intention. The other aspects for which the 3rd Deputy Law Draftsman would be responsible relate very much to the strategic and operational aspects of the Law Drafting Division, and in that regard our paper mentions the Camera Ready project that is being proposed. This is something that the 3rd Deputy Law Draftsman would lead that particular project. What we are looking for is to ensure that the effectiveness and efficiency of the Law Drafting Division is kept up to standard.
主席，我剛才問就係話政府係咪手頭上邊？
Just now I asked whether the government has planned major drafting work in the pipeline, but I did not hear it from the answer. Perhaps I will ask a more focused question. When in relation to Article 23, national security law, local legislation, are they included under this newly created post, and that position is supposed to lead that work? Ms. Johnson.
As regards the issue raised by the member, the government's position has already been clearly set out by the Chief Executive and by the Constitutional and Mainlands Affairs Bureau on various occasions. If members have specific views about certain issues relating to that issue, then they should be addressed to the Policy Bureau. There's not a link between the proposal to create this role, which is very much required because of a general increase in the workload, both in terms of volume and complexity of the legislation being required from the Law Drafting Division with that particular area of responsibility. So if we look at the trends that are set out in the paper at paragraphs 23 and 28, there are very clear statistics about the increasing volume and the increasing workload of the Law Drafting Division generally. Law Drafting Division's been trying to absorb that additional workload, but that's no longer sustainable. And the creation of the proposed post will enable the drafting work, the quality assurance work that I mentioned earlier, the training and other work of the existing 2 deputy law draftsmen to be shared across 3 law draftsmen.
主席，我唔知點解。
I don't understand why I still can't get the answer I want. Is it because they don't want to answer the question? I was asked to go to ask the Policy Bureau. But if you are going to ask me to go and ask every single bureau, I don't think we need this meeting. Isn't it the case that the government already knows how many important laws in the pipeline that they need to draft on? You now ask me to go and ask each and every policy bureau. I was supposed to ask Carrie Lam whether she was planning to legislate for Article 23. Time's up. Let me remind you that last time there was a member asking the same question, whether this is the post created for legislation for Article 23. Well, the government department said that no. I seldom that I heard such clear answer. Well, in notwithstanding, the member kept asking the same question. The answer was given last time. You may refer to that, the recording. You listen to the recording, I heard it, and I heard a clear answer, no. You listen to the recording first. Please remain calm. You may leave any time to listen to the recording. Let's continue with the question session. Next is Mr. Kenneth Leung. Mr. Kenneth Leung, you have 5 minutes. May I start? Well, it is unfair for you to say that. You don't listen to the tape. You can only come back after you've listened to the tape before you say that I'm wrong. Mr. Kenneth Leung, please be quiet.
A question to Ms. Johnson. No, I'm not going to repeat this question because I think, Claudia, you will have a chance to ask this question again. You can do it again. Sorry, two questions. If you, Ms. Johnson, if you can tell me what future legislation is in the pipeline, because you can guess what the Bureau will, table or give instruction to your department. Can you tell us currently what big chunks of legislation is your division undertaking at the moment? I want to know what kind of complexity you've been facing in drafting these legislations. I mean, what big and complicated legislations are you undertaking at the moment? And of course, I expect that you must feel the pressure, or there must be a morale issue of your team if you are going to ask for extra pairs of hands. And secondly, I would like to know, is Chinese language a prerequisite for these positions? Because as I understand it, of course, you are drafting the laws based on the common law precedents of some other countries sometimes, and of course you start off with the drafting in English, of course. But I must say, the Chinese translation of these laws are very poorly done. And as a very experienced member in handling bills of various types, I am unable to comprehend the Chinese translation of these bills. Although, I mean, your English work is of a very quality standard, but the Chinese translation of these bills is incomprehensible. And how are you going to fix this problem, Ms. Johnson?
Highlight the future legislative projects that are not mentioned in the paper, the ones that I am at liberty to speak about because the government has already publicly announced them. There are those, and these are in addition to the Trade Single Window project that is mentioned in the paper and the Corporate Rescue Bill that's highlighted in the paper as well. But there are, for example, items on the public legislative program for the second half of the 2018-2019 year, including bills such as the Medical Devices Bill, which will regulate the supply of medical devices in Hong Kong through pre-market and post-market control. There is the Occupational Retirement Schemes Amendment Bill, which will update the ordinance to enhance the powers of the registrar to ensure that the schemes are in fact genuine employment-based retirement schemes and to improve the governance of occupational retirement schemes.
Ms. Johnson, can you highlight any of those legislation which you think conceptually and technically are more difficult to deal with? I don't want a list of these, shopping list of legislation, but in your view, which are the more complicated and convoluted, pieces of legislation?
Ms. Johnson.
Thank you. I would have to say that I think the Corporate Rescue Bill is exceptionally complex. The Trade Single Window Bill also falls into that category because of the nature of the matters that those bills and projects will cover. But in terms of other legislation that's not mentioned in the paper that the government has committed to introducing, I would have to say that the Building Management Amendment Bill falls into that category in terms of seeking to keep pace with the changes in that particular subject area and to improve the situation with owners' corporations. And we have announced policies that have been included, for example, in the CE's policy address and the policy agenda, which deal with the introduction of limited partnership regimes for private equity funds and also the formation of special purpose financial vehicles, especially for issuing insurance-linked securities in Hong Kong. I think the subject matters that I'm talking about there are indeed complex.
Oh, how about my second question about the Chinese language translation?
Yes, thank you. In terms of bilingual legislation, the Law Drafting Division puts a very high priority in doing all that we can to ensure that the Chinese version of the language, and we're not talking just about a translation, but in effect something that is legislation of itself, is of a higher standard. We continue to explore options that are available in order to come up with something that is in fact of the highest standard.
下一位陳志全議員。
係主席。
Next, Mr. Ray Chan. Well, at the end of the previous meeting, I did put forward a question. I didn't notice that the law draftsman have to provide a definitive answer as you claim. I hope that I can bring a better line of questioning so that the draftsman could offer a better answer so that our colleagues have a better idea instead of asking us to go check the recording. At the last meeting, a lot of members were asking that for the creation of this deputy law draftman, is it responsible to handling the major but sensitive legislation, including Article 23? And last week, the administration haven't been as firm in their response as claimed by the chairman. But looking at the paper, I do have this concern. On page 26, and claim that an additional DLD to independently undertake major drafting exercises. And for page 27, and in the past, the division responsible to issues, for example, appropriations bill and the trade issues, as well as to local legislation for the national anthem law. The Secretary for CMAP claim is very straightforward with a few number of pages, and yet they were regarded as major issues that require the division to handle it. So for Article 23 involving a lot of legal amendments, why would it not count as major? Well, so is this DLD mainly responsible for the legislative work on major drafting text? Well, another way of doing it will be make it a supernumerary post. We only handle the drafting exercise for those that have been made public, or you actually create a position especially for Article 23 legislation. I know the government have answered that on many occasions, but can you tell at this time, would you consider that with the duties of this DLD that you would not be responsible for Article 23 legislation, or you make an undertaking that for Article 23 legislation you will separately create a position solely for Article 23, so as to dispel our concern. Even if we have such plans today, after you create this position, well, we can't rule out that the government will include this in the job duty for the DLD.
About drafting services and a deputy law draftsman performing personally drafting services. This is for the most complex and for the most sensitive legislation. This is a generic requirement across the existing 2 deputy law draftsmen. There is no intention that this position, which we are seeking to have created, will be for any specific project. As you point out, if we were seeking it for a particular project, then a supernumerary position may be appropriate. But we are seeking a permanent position to in fact enable us to fulfil our duties and responsibilities to draft all of the legislation that is required within the government's legislative program. The Law Drafting Division has tried to absorb the additional workload, and again I point back to those statistics that are set out in the paper. There is just a very clear trend in terms of the increasing volume and the increasing complexity of legislation.
謝偉銓議員，
主席，
Chairman, so you heard from her. She didn't give a firm answer or repeating what you said and claim that this position will not be responsible for Article 23. So her question to answer was just something regurgitating in the past before. Well, she not saying that. So let me say what I said last time. Last time James Toh asked her, are you creating this for Article 23 legislation? She said had to do with the workload. So do you think she can tell us this will definitely not handle Article 23? Well, she's showing it's not enough people. She haven't anyone new over 25 years. How can you make the undertaking that you get position cannot handle Article 23? Do you think she could answer this? I think you're being unnecessary. Tony Chair. Well, whatever you interpret, you made it quite clear. Well, if I listen calmly, she thinks nothing to do with that. It's just purely a workload issue. And yet you're forcing her to promise not to undertake Article 23. You're not going to achieve your aim. You're wasting everyone's time. And thank you, Chairman. I think the paper have pretty much stated its case. For over 2 decades or so, that the DOJ Law Drafting Division and the Civil Division have a spike in the workload. And for this, well, we have not much change for the ranks of the directorate officers. That's exactly why I'm supporting creation of this post. We have a more workload. Of course, you need to have more people, otherwise the pace will slow down. From my understanding, the LDD is responsible for drafting laws, for example, the provisions, the wording, whether they fit with the style, or whether in contravening other ordinances, and whether you're able to fulfill its legislative intent. As for the policy legislation and the implementation of the policies, I believe that the relevant policy bureaus should be accountable for that. For drafting, it's just drafting. I think the LDD is simply complying with the requirements of the policy bureau and their directions. As we're asking for a particular piece of legislation, how are they expect to give an answer? Because their job is to draft legislation. If there are too many and not enough people, then you have to add more people. Or you claim they're inefficient, or it's simply the workload warrants that. I think we have to make a judgment. If you're not clear, ask for more answers. You shouldn't be targeting a particular piece of legislation. For them, the policy bureau will need to ask for a legislation. They will just draft as per their requests. Well, we haven't had an increase in ranks for over 2 decades, and we have rising public expectations, and the workload getting more complicated. How can we handle without more people? Then we'll just have to take more time. But now that we want to be more efficient, therefore I'm supporting this proposal. So well, I want to know that if my understanding of the workload of the LDD is correct. It was members mentioned Article 23 legislation for when to legislate is unrelated to this LDD because they don't decide on the timing. There should be the policy bureau rather. I would like to get confirmation whether my understanding is correct.
I thank the member. Yes, your understanding is correct in that the Law Drafting Division provides those drafting services when drafting instructions have been approved by the relevant policy bureau and they come to the Law Drafting Division. It is at that point in time that we become involved.
另外，主席我都想佢。
And I would also like to know that you're adding more staff purely due to workload. If you don't add these new positions, any way to get around it, or you just want to have to slow down the process so that the major legislative exercises will be procrastinated.
Could refer to the figures that are mentioned in the paper and perhaps add one to it. In 2006, the Law Drafting Division drafted 5,252 pages. By 2017, that's up 63% to more than 8,000. Last year, in fact, the figure was above 9,500 pages, and of those, we had many that were complex. In terms of what it means to the Law Drafting Division, the fact that we have only 2 Deputy Law Draftsmen means that we need to be quite pragmatic in the way in which we meet the timetable. It means that the number of checks that are done by the Deputy Law Draftsmen occur at a later point in time, so they are looking at a narrower scope of things. They are ensuring that legislation is legally effective, that the meaning between the English and the Chinese is the same. They are looking at the things that are the absolute essentials. Is the scheme workable, legally effective, the same in English and Chinese? If we have an opportunity for more supervision at that level, then the clearances that are provided could happen at an earlier point in time and they could look more at other issues that relate to quality, for example, around readability.
好，阿石禮謙議員。
主席，
Mr. Abraham Shek, Chairman, you must have a hard time. You have to last till 7. it's your job not to make them understand. It's just to make sure that the proceedings are going smoothly and pass these recommendations. That, well, they don't get it. It's not your problem. They don't get it because they don't care or they don't have the time to understand. Chairman, you just disregard them and soon have to squabble with them. You've been too nice to explain. But sometimes the more explaining you do, the more confused they get. I'm speak to support the creation of two positions, and just now, Teresa's response to Mr. Leung is quite well. This is for a general position. If there are any for specific projects, when there is such need arise, they will come to the panel, advance for ESC, and after we agree, then would finally come to FC. That's how these processes. Now, it's impossible to go back, turn back the clock. And even with Article 23, let's say the positions created, they haven't ruled out doing Article 23 legislation if they offer to them and they could handle it. Well, we can't control when they do it. If they want people and we simply to meet their need. If they had the need to do Article 23 without hiring anyone extra, good luck on them. Just do it. We just can't ask the timetable for every particular bill. When things get to a certain stage, they will get involved. Things simple as that shouldn't even bother quarreling. You should get hold of the situation. I personally, well, it's better if I don't need to add anyone to do that. It's not a matter for complex or not. They can really decide for themselves. Well, for your health, you don't have to be too exasperated. Thank you, Mr. Sheck. I'm simply recapping what happened in the last meeting to members. Whether they take it nicely or not my problem. If they dwell on things that they shouldn't, you're wasting the meeting's time. Well, for this item, we've been discussed over 4 hours. If every project required this amount of time, the Hong Kong will be in trouble. That's what I'm concerned about. You have the authority. If they keep on giving gibberish, if you don't understand, you don't have to extend the meeting. We support to do what to do. You don't have to care whether they understand or support or not. While I speak, I'm very calm. It's still within my time, Ms. Mo. Ms. Mo, please respect others. Others are talking. Nobody talking while you're talking. That's not right. Even if you're married, you respect people's right. You just leave within 5 minutes. Well, if you're getting heckled while you speak, I wouldn't stop others because you stay, but I should be encouraged. Mr. Sheck, anything to add? Chairman, do what you ought to do. You're the master of procedure. You decide. Well, under basic law and the ruling actually gave you such authority. Next, Mr. KK Kwok, 5 minutes. Well, when did they ever deny that?
Chairman, I still want to follow up on one of the previous questions on law drafting. Yes, we understand, but then I think a member have asked about the link with Article 23. I would like to give you more time to answer the same question.
Thank you. I'm not sure that there is anything more that I can say on this particular topic. Providing drafting services for legislation that's proposed by the government, that is the primary responsibility for the Law Drafting Division. Indeed, I would think that that is a fact well understood by members. The Law Drafting Division needs to be equipped with adequate resources to provide an up-to-standard service. In terms of particular projects, this position is not being created for a particular project or projects. This position is being created with the Finance Committee's approval to deal with the general increase in workload, both complexity and volume.
或者我可以咁樣問啦，即係呢
Perhaps I could ask it like this. For this new post, well, in Finance Committee, we have recordings. So I could say that this new post, as of now and in the future, will not involve Article 23. Can I have that confirmation?
The Law Drafting Division will need to provide drafting services for whatever legislation the government requires. That is the answer that I am able to give.
咁即係話咧，嗱，我清得好清楚咧，就係法律草擬科咧，就係無論
So, regardless of what legislation the government proposes, including Article 23, when the government gives you the Article 23, then you will not be able to reject it. I'm not trying to make things difficult for you or for your division. Because the government may use your department as a political tool to propose Article 23. This is a very important part in our discussion. You have to understand that in Hong Kong we do not have a democratic election, and therefore the public is very concerned with Article 23. And this is actually a reverse of what we hope to see in democracy. So well, after you came on board, has the government ever discussed that you may need to create a post in the future to work on Article 23? If yes, when was this, and how many people do you have to recruit for that?
I can again repeat that providing the drafting services for legislation proposed by the government is the primary responsibility of the Law Drafting Division. The Department of Justice is the government's legal advisor. Our communications in that capacity with government and with the Bureau and with the departments, they are subject to legal professional privilege. And that extends to whether there is any draft bill or related information as to whether or not there's a particular bill or any drafting instructions for a particular bill. For this reason, we're not in a position to confirm whether or not there's any work or anything in contemplation on any proposed legislation unless the information's already been disclosed by government. And I trust that the concept of legal professional privilege is well understood by members.
我個認知同你又唔同，因為
Well, I think my understanding differs from yours, because every penny in public money is actually taxpayers' money. So if the government is fair and just, then, well, of course, when we discuss Article 23, the public has the right to know whether taxpayer money is being spent on that. If we're not able to get a clear response, that means you already have an inclination to try to hide something for the government. This is not what we want to see from civil servants. I hope you understand that, Mr. Julius Ho. Chairman, I just want to try to clarify something. Today, we are looking into creation of posts, and it is stated very clearly in the paper that this is to help a government to cope with the substantial increase in workload, whether it be Article 23, 24, 25, 26. If there is a need to legislate, then the law draftsman will need to work on that. So the law draftsman already said that there is a need to work on whatever the government proposes, to look at the so of course I don't understand what the problem is. Article 23 is one of our constitutional responsibilities under the Basic Law. Well, who do you think you are? You object to Article 23, and so are you now in fear that this will be legislated? I don't know why you're trying to deviate from the item today. If you look at the paper, this does not involve Article 23, but you keep on hassling about Article 23 here. This is really not appropriate. I don't think this is an appropriate question to ask the law draftsman whether she can make a commitment not to work on Article 23. She does not have the right and power to make such a promise. And even, as I said, if we are going to legislate Article 23, of course we don't have it at this moment. Well, you know, this is the way things should be. Well, you said that Hong Kong people really object to Article 23. I don't know where your basis for this come from. I think this is something we really need to work on. We really should expedite it. So, you know, we do not have the same definition of Hong Kong people, right? I don't know how many Hong Kong people you represent. So I don't think that we should continue to haggle on this point on Article 23. The law draftsman has already answered your question very clearly, and that she is no position to give you a response or give you a promise. I don't think that you really should intervene and try to micromanage the meeting here. Chairman, I don't think we should continue to talk about this. We've already discussed it at AGSL, have also discussed it at different occasions. I fully support the creation of these two posts. Thank you. Dr. Helena Wong, 4 minutes, please. Chairman, well, the DAB is only here, you know, to press the yes button. I'm sure they don't understand why we are asking questions. But you have to know that before you vote for the item, you must first understand what this is about. Well, look at what you voted for at the budget. Now we have to cut or scrap the elderly allowance for people 60 years of age to 64 years of age. Now, this is something you agreed to. Now we are looking into the opening of a post to handle difficult and complicated matters. Of course, we need to question about that, whether it really includes the legislature of Article 23. If we don't ask questions now, then you will need to work on whatever the government proposes, and of course that does not rule out the possibility of legislating on Article 23. I don't understand why the chairman keeps on saying that Article 23 will not be legislated. Well, she didn't say that. She just said that they will need to work on whatever the government proposes. So I think we should ask the secretary or ask the CE, because, you know, the Department of Justice cannot say yes or no. Well, although we do understand that we do have a constitutional responsibility, but then the basic law also says that we need to have a democratic election. Well, this hasn't been implemented yet. Well, I think you really don't understand this, Mr. Ho. In 2003, when we tried to legislate it back then, you know, there were about 500,000 people on the streets because everybody thought that the legislature was not written well, and everybody was in fear, and they were afraid that they would lose their freedom to express themselves, and that all this would be impacted. Well, as a legislator, you know, we really need to try to better understand the situation now, because it has happened before. So we must understand it clearly this time. Chairman, your responsibility is to cancel the meeting and not to just speak up in defense of the government. Or is there any response, from the government? Ms. Johnson will there also might there be a possibility of including Article 23?
When we look at what the workload of the Law Drafting Division has been, there has just been a very clear trend in terms of increasing the volume and increasing the complexity. In terms of what the Law Drafting Division's primary responsibility is, it is in fact to draft the legislation that's required by the government. That puts to one side the responsibilities to do other things, for example, the vetting of members' bills. So when it comes to what that may be, we look at what is publicly available, and we know that that is what the Law Drafting Division's responsibilities will be in the coming period. When it comes to the particular issue that the member mentions, the Chief Executive has been quite clear about the government's position in relation to that, and I can say no more.
好嗱，因為黃碧雲議員咧反覆講。
Well, as Dr. Helena Wong kept on giving wrong information, so I will have to try to clarify it. Well, I have told the secretary to take up Mr. To's recording from last week. Mr. To asked last week that whether Article 23 will be legislated.
唔係特別為某一個項目而做，我覺得。
Well, I think that she was very clear. She said that she has been very clear. Now you're asking her to promise not to work on Article 23. This is a very naive question. She's part of a government department. She just has to take instructions from the government. Well, I think you're asking a very unreasonable question. It's a waste of time. Please be quiet. May I speak? Mr. Yik I speak to in support of the creation of these posts, because I think that there are many legislations that need to be updated. For example, recently we talked about some vessels are trying to park in the typhoon shelters. So, there are many items that we really need to discuss and update. So I am in support of opening up this post as soon as possible. There are a lot of IMO that we need to follow up from the Marine Department. Anyways, Chairman, I really don't understand what the Democratic Party is talking about. Are they saying that if we do not support the opening of this post, then Article 23 would not be legislated? I really don't understand. Anyways, so I just want to say that I support this item.
I thank the member for his support.
Yeah, but he said about some laws are not sufficient and there's more things to be done.
In terms of...
唔使答，OK, he
Oh, there's no need to answer the question.
Contact your department to sort out what he thinks is not sufficient.
Well, certainly when it comes to policy, that is not a responsibility for the Law Drafting Division. It would be appropriate to speak to the relevant bureau, yes, indeed.
Okay.
Marine Department.
OK, 梁美芬議員。
Dr. Priscilla Leung, Chairman. I think Ms. Johnson gave very clear answers, and there is nothing more for her to say. We already talked about this in June 2018 at the HSL meeting. And there hasn't been increase in manpower for many years. Well, after the handover in 1997, there have been many judicial reviews, and even on the non-refoulement claims, all those. So when I heard that there hasn't been any updates in manpower since the 1980s, I was very shocked. Well, other members kept on asking about Article 23. I really don't understand why. Well, I didn't hear them asking this question at our panel meeting. Now, and secondly, I don't think this is an appropriate question. It is also a very silly question, because you should understand that when the bureaus have decided to work on legislation, then they will need to defer to the LDD to work on. And then she has already given a very clear answer that the workload is very heavy and they need more manpower. Well, now you on this side, you're afraid of Article 23. Well, look at the business sector. Well, do you have to start working on some sort of legislation to counter class action or something like that? I really respect Ms. Johnson for her answers. No, she said that there's nothing more she can say. Well, this is exactly what she should be saying. No, this is her position. Well, we can all continue asking about other legislations. Well, are we going to amend the marriage ordinance? This is not her responsibility. If you need to have the bureaus to work on these decisions, I think we should move our discussion back to what needs to be talked about today. Why are there these new questions now? It was already supported at the AGSL. I don't understand why we are talking about this now. Well, I don't want to use point of order, so that is why I queued up in line to speak up. I don't think we really should continue talking about Article 23. Well, many of us here actually are in favor of legislating Article 23. Well, you don't like it, but we like it. So what can we do? Can we only draw legislation when you are also supporting it? Many of us are actually experienced legislators. You should understand that this is an issue with workload. It is very appropriate and very reasonable. Well, she's already given you all the responses that she can give you. She's not in a position to speak up on behalf of the bureaus. Well, I just want to make this clear that we have already made all our discussions last year, and then it was approved without any objections. Thank you. Dr. Priscilla Leung, for your supplementary information. Mr. Lau Kwok Fan. Thank you, Chairman. Well, I am also in support of the creation of the post. We see that now work has been delayed because of the increasing workload, and I think that with more people on board, then maybe we could speed up some of the processes. Well, I hear Dr. Helena Wong saying that we should understand it carefully before we support anything. Well, I agree with that. Well, sometimes I saw that in the previous meeting you also voted abstention because you weren't very clear about it. So yes, I understand that we should be clear before voting for anything. But I agree with Dr. Priscilla Leung that we should not just focus on one particular item. Well, I want to ask, if we do not open this post, and even if Article 23 is to be legislated, you still have to work on it anyways, right? Even without the creation of this post. Ms. Johnson.
I thank the member for these comments. The workload of the Law Drafting Division at present is extreme. As I pointed out, we in fact have almost 10,000 pages of legislation that were published last year. I mean, we're talking 37 ordinances that were enacted in 2018, 28 bills were gazetted. The workload is very high, and the subject matter on which we are drafting laws is increasingly complex. Sophisticated areas are being legislated for that, I guess, reflect Hong Kong's place in terms of international obligations, etc. So all I can say is that the workload within the Law Drafting Division is very high, and I do not believe that it's sustainable to continue with only 2 deputy law draftsmen. We have gone from having only 19 counsel within the division in 1982 to having 48 at the present time. And so the management structure within the division is in dire need of additional supplementary resources at that Deputy Law Draftsman level.
嘅事實就好清楚，基本上。
It is very clear that whether there will be legislation for Article 23 is a decision for the Chief Executive. And if they think that public sentiment calls for it, then there will be legislation for Article 23 with or without the creation of this post. And without this post, then it would be more difficult for them to cope with workload, with the existing amount of work. And I don't think you should shift the responsibility onto government officials. It's not whether Article 27 will be legislated or not. There is an acute manpower shortage to deal with law drafting work in the pipeline and future ones. I don't need to use all my 5 minutes. I support the creation of the posts. Mr. Eddie Chu, 3 minutes. Thank you. On the last occasion, after I heard Mr. James To's question, I would describe it as a light bulb moment. Well, Mr. James To asked the question of legislation for Article 23 for a reason, because there are two parts in the paper that would give people that impression. First is paragraph 27. It's just like what Mr. James To said, that for no reason whatsoever, you have made the local legislation for national anthem law into a major issue, albeit when it is actually a simple issue. And you also said in another paragraph that the Deputy Law Draftsman will have to personally deal with complicated and sensitive law drafting matters. So taking the two together, and you want us not to think along this line, you will have to give us a very good reason why you will, in paragraph 27, make out the simple local legislation for national anthem law as a major issue. Because we can get an inkling. If you were wearing tinted glasses, when you look at the issue, then of course people will read it differently. After you have completed the legislation for national anthem, you said there will be even more complicated issues. I understand that according to Ms. Priscilla Leung, that it might be matrimonial causes. But to be honest, we all know what's happening in 2019 in Hong Kong. And before you have Article 23, you're making use of society's ordinance by making it more malleable, and you used it to disqualify certain groups or political groups. Then why would you expect people not to think about Article 23? Because with a rusty blade, you're already getting rid of people. What do you think will happen if you have a very sharp, a very powerful sword? I describe Article 23 as a nuclear bomb that will kill everyone. And the Law Drafting Division is the very core component. Something along the lines of it is a core component to extract uranium. Of course, everyone will come out and oppose to you. Everyone will be up in arms. So don't think that people have no reason when they raise an objection. Well, I have made it very clear that they have made it very clear that it's not for a particular piece of legislation. Well, you can't say that we require you not to write down that it is not for that. The answer was very clear. Mr. James To, is your turn. I thank Edward Lau for the very good question, because his question has supplemented my point. I think now everything is out in the open. Without this post, are we still going to go ahead with Article 23? According to Ms. Johnson, they said, well, we have a huge workload. I don't think it's sustainable. So this is about the creation of this post. Mr. Frankie Yik also said something else. Well, it is not just about the creation of this post. It's about something that the person will have to personally take up to deal with sensitive issue. Ms. Johnson said that without the creation of the post, then they will not be sustainable. What does it mean? That means if you're going to give them a task of legislating for Article 23, from what I can hear, is that I won't be able to cope with Article 23. And it's because already they want to the creation of this post to go forward. Do you understand? So we're not saying that the creation of this post is for a particular task. We were saying that does it have a capacity to take something up? Last time I heard that, well, according to the Chief Executive, there are some preparatory works. And I asked the Law Drafting Division, or with the creation of this post, or whether it's a work that has been undertaken now. But I did not get any answer. There may be one of three possibilities. First, they're already working preparatory works, and they can't cope. So they are actually calling for help, so the Treasury allow the creation of this post. Two, they're not working for Article 23, but they reckon that in a foreseeable future, if the Policy Bureau, if CE said that with the spare capacity of the DLD, then they will be able to take up this work. It's very clear. Ms. Johnson.
If I could refer back to paragraph 27 of the paper. This paper was prepared at a time at which the 2018 budget and tax-related measures had not been drafted, and the local legislation for the National Anthem law had been announced but also had not been drafted. At this point in time, at the beginning of 2019, that work has now been completed, and that forms part of the 9,500 pages of legislation that I was talking about in relation to 2018. So we now look at what is mentioned in the paper about what's further ahead. And we talk about two mega projects there, the Trade Single Window project, and I'm happy to provide further details to justify why that is considered a mega project, and also the Statutory Corporate Rescue Procedure project. Both of those are mega projects. And then later this afternoon, I have given examples of other complex legislative projects that have been announced by the government, whether they've been included in the CE's policy address of 2018 or are on the legislative program, or in fact are the subject of other government announcements, to illustrate the fact that the workload of the Law Drafting Division is continuing at a very high level. This
Yeah, so you want to continue? Yeah, please.
oh, sorry.
蕭生你想講下
Mr. Siu, you would like to supplement? Just now, a member mentioned about enclosure 7, that there are some descriptions, and I would like to explain, so the members will not overread between the lines. And it says here that it will be personally responsible for legislating for very sensitive issues. Of course, it's a very high-ranking post. They will be responsible for complicated tasks, and it's not just limited to this new deputy law draftsman post. It applies to the two existing deputy law draftsmen. These are senior posts. Of course, they will be responsible for more complicated issues. Mr. Aunokin, 2 minutes. Whether it was Mr. Siu or the chairman, yourself, my reading is that there is a possibility of Article 23. Ms. Johnson said there is not for any particular project, but according to the two members, the answer was not any specific project. To the question of Ms. Wong, is to conduct legislation requirements. So if there is a task given to them to legislate for Article 23, then they will have to do it. The second point, well, Mr. Ho said that there is nothing about Article 23. I asked him to refer to paragraph 24. It means that, well, because the work is led by the Bureau. Ms. Priscilla Leung talked about an increase of workload. They all said that there is an increase of workload. But the additional number of cases doesn't register an increasing trend. My understanding is about backlog. So you said that there is additional workload, and you have to ask a question. With the creation of this post, does it help with dealing with backlog? Can I hear from the department? Does it help to deal with backlog of cases with this post? I only have 30 seconds. Who is to take the question? Ms. Chung? I think Mr. Au is talking about civil litigation. No, at the beginning I talked about law drafting, and now, yes, it's civil litigation. Well, there are a lot of complicated cases in the backlog. We have supplied information. There are about 5,000 to 6,000 new cases adding to the workload, but the number remains unchanged. That's why I don't accept their answer. I would like to use Rule 39 of the Financial Committee procedure to adjourn this item. I have 3 reasons. First, the justifications in the paper is incomplete. If you carefully read the paper and ask questions, then you realize that there is sufficient justifications given. And some of these reasons are illogical. As I've said, that the paper keeps talking about the number of cases of judicial review as well as non-refoulement claims. So it's an artificial inflation of demand. But the additional manpower under the civil litigation is not responsible for dealing with torture claims. So it will not help with clearing backlog. And the number of non-refoulement claims has been dropping. According to the question answered by the SB to Ms. Priscilla Leung, it said the number of outstanding is about 540 non-refoulement cases. So it's not just the case that the argument is wrong, the proof is also incorrect. Mr. James To asked about legislating for Article 23. It's a yes or no question, and they said that it's not specific, not at any particular project. It's not a direct answer of yes or no. Does it mean that they have something that they can't divulge? I remain unconvinced. The reasons given in the paper, well, is not correct. Is it the real reason? Is it Article 23? A number of occasions we've been misled. The DOJ has not particularly answered what counts as a sensitive issues. There is no need. They say there is a huge need. So I am not happy about these misleading ways to put things. Well, they have a poor track record. It's not the first time that the government departments misled legislators. FC 108 stroked number 18. A question was asked about sewage treatment center. Water Supplies Department has abused power and misled legislators to give them funding. When they asked for funding approval, they have already used similar tactics. Well, now there is economic downturn, so we have to be very careful with the use of public money. I'm afraid that the sale of a land will not fetch $100 billion. So we're very concerned about the physical position of the government. We have to make very careful use of public money. And they now ask the creation of permanent posts. I don't want to be criticized for squandering taxpayers' money. So I appeal to legislators who are rubber stamps, please think for taxpayers.
Sad. I'm saying things are getting so sad and ironic. I had no intention of speaking again on this particular item originally. Because last time, following up on James To's questions, I did ask about the connection between the legislation of Article 23 and this new appointment of a new head law draftsman. And I got the reply to the effect that you couldn't really either confirm or deny anything, any particular law being involved or to be involved, right? Because it's all subject to the government's legislative projects in due course. So you couldn't confirm, naturally, but you couldn't deny either. And I found that perfectly reasonable. I took it. I accepted that. And so I was prepared to stay quiet and just raise my hand to pass this request for funding. But then this meeting chairman claimed that you categorically deny that this new post has anything to do with the legislation of Article 23. And he kept telling us that we were wrong, that we were the ones, we are here, being childish, and so on. And that successfully stirred up some distrust on my part that there could be some collusion there. I don't know, probably not involving any of you who are sitting out there. But between this legislature and the government, is there something fishy there? Because originally, nobody saw anything dodgy about these two new posts. But then the fact that you actually cited the national anthem law as one example of law drafting, which could be complex and voluminous, right? We used those two adjectives last week. And we were wondering at the time why you would call a national anthem law particularly complex. It's barely 3 sheets or 4 pages at most, right? And then it's not voluminous in any way. And then we thought about Article 23. And that's how this discussion started. I rested, I thought. But this chairman started it. He restarted this discussion. So let this discussion be adjourned.
Your time
be
is up.
put on.
黃碧雲議員。
Ms. Elena Wong, Chairman, we still do not hear from the government that the post holder of the created post will not be taking up the job of legislating for Article 23. The stance of the Democratic Party is very clear. Before we have dual universal suffrage, we don't support legislating for Article 23. We have said this to the government and the chief executive many times. We asked them to restart constitutional reform and implement the universal suffrage for the election of the chief executive and the formation of the LegCo. They said that so far there is no timetable, and that they will have to first try to forge a favorable atmosphere. You haven't even completed constitutional reform. We, of course, don't think that you should jump the gun by creating this post for legislating for Article 23. We think it's appropriate to adjourn the discussion. Perhaps we should hear from the government in no unclear term this actual scope of the created posts, including what kinds of major and complicated legislating work.
Horace Chung. Today, some of the grounds for objection by some pandams is baffling. I couldn't imagine we were stuck in this, and for the DOJ to open new positions dealing with civil division and law drafting division, of course they would deal with drafting, whether include, let's say, Article 23, whether it's on government's agenda. If they falls below the laws drafting division, then there will be its job. Now you are putting people on the difficult spot. Let's say FEHT would like to hire a cleaner and nasty FEHT to undertake for the worker not to clean up particular streets before allowing this position. No one can really promise that they will not undertake any particular kind of work in this job. There's really putting DOJ in a very high position. I certainly object to this motion to adjourn. Mr. Gary Chan. Chairman, just now I'll lock in move a motion to adjourn the discussion. One of the grounds was a claim that a drop in the non-reforming claims. That's actually part of the truth, but not the other half. In fact, there are 6,000 to 7,000 torture claims here undergo the appeal process. Thus, the DOJ's work are very voluminous and deserve more manpower. Even the Chief Justice had mentioned that this would put enormous pressure on the judiciary and must be addressed. Thus, Mr. Au's point is invalid. We cannot support his motion to adjourn. Mr. Lau Kwok Fan. Lau Kwok Fan. Thank you, Chairman. I speak to object this adjourn motion. Not only they're having ad hominem attacks, but also try to avoid the inevitable. For your own political stance, that you deem that you must the position must be for Article 23. That's why I'm disregarding the workload in front of you, or no matter how slow the pace of legislation, I will not allow you to create this position. This is illogical. For those who are present and those who provide the response, I'll explain. They're part of the administration. When Chief Executive decide on something, whether they have fresh manpower or not, they have to get on with it. The more pressing thing is that the workload was so heavy. So just because they might have to legislate for Article 23, let's say they couldn't finish this work, and a lot of the important matters are waiting to be legislated, and we put it all behind us, so it's ridiculous. So I object to your German motion. Mr. Hu Chi-wai. Listening to those from the pro-establishment camp, I think they are shifting the focus. Those from the pandemics worry about the Article 23 legislation, and that has been the consistent position that before achieving universal suffrage, Article 23 legislation will lead to social upheavals, and that's a concern and a fact. And for the creation of these two posts, the biggest problem is the government officials are not able to respond to your question, as in you need to do advanced preparation work for Article 23. I'm asking for a yes or no question. However, the response I got is rather ambiguous. So our concern that the Chief Executive said that openly, the social atmosphere is not right for Article 23. After creating this post, you have done the preparation on Article 23, and you don't divulge to us this. In a certain extent, you are concealing the government's initiatives. I think what is set up in the article serves the basis for not able to accept. I think the government officials can give a clear answer that on the preparation for Article 23, has that been put on their agenda for the law drafting division, or like you said in the paper, that we'll be focusing on other areas. Of course, I can't tell when the Carrie Lam will give out the orders, but if you give us the answer today, even the Democratic Party might not agree to this position, but at least you give a public account on that whether Article 20, what is the position of the Article 23 legislation and government agenda, so that we can be prepared. And since this is a very worrying matter for the Hong Kong public, which affect our freedom of speech. And this concern has been lingering since 2003 and still exists. Thus, because of this, Carrie Lam herself said that is this something not at the right time? If the LLD actually have made some preparations and in today's meeting you refuse to come clean, this warrant us to adjourn the discussion so as to express our stance on this. Mr. Ray Chan, for the multiple round of questions for the past 90 minutes or so have been circling around that whether this position and the LDD is for the sake of preparing for Article 23. I think this discussion has value. Chairman, your understanding is different from that of members. When the draftman replied that it's not to prepare a particular piece of legislation or any piece of legislation, however, that doesn't mean that nothing to do with Article 23. For the deliberations, you said you need to do A, B, C. Would you need to do D? Or would D be Article 23? I have no idea whether we would have to take on D. If we had reasonable doubt, and throughout discussion that we have deemed it unlikely, and whether to support to adjourn motion or not support is perfectly normal. Like Dr. Principal Leung said, if you amend the marriage ordinance, I would not support it. If the government lost the JR and they need to amend the marriage ordinance and the law draftsman would ask whether they will need to amend the marriage ordinance, then the Principal Leung may not support. Or on MPF offsetting or reasonable ambition, they will go ahead. If the Liberal Party will not support it, that's perfectly normal for them. I agree that we should not dwell on this. If we establish it being likely, then you take on D, which could be Article 23. That's the end of the discussion. Then just object to this creation of these two posts. However, Chairman, you cannot mislead the public. Take a simple example. Let's say you do not let your kids do video games. Let's say your kids ask for $5,000. Is that for purchasing video game consoles? It's just from own spending. They're asking you, will you buy video games? I won't ruling that out. Okay, I'll not give you $5,000. If you promise you and not buy video games, or maybe you've been vague, then when I see the need arises, or may or may not buy, I'm not avoid it right now. Anyway, do you get the analogy? Well, feel free to report. Okay, when it concerns that after we create this position, or we suspect you may do something, we're actually giving you the bullet and the manpower so that you can expedite it or to enhance it from your perspective. Whereas we said if you have a tighter manpower and you have such a severe shortage of manpower, so of course we hope that you will not touch on Article 23 anytime soon. So that's a perfect reasonable request. I suppose after this round of adjourned motion debate, or maybe the draftmans can elaborate, I don't see that we need to argue any longer. However, you shouldn't deny it. You don't have to explain for them that it has nothing to do with that, while the members are expecting otherwise. Mr. Ray Chan, your analysis is inappropriate. Now they don't have a choice. The LDD do what it was assigned to do. Well, let's say you could just focus on Article 23 and do nothing else. I think your questions are meaningless. The only thing I agree with you, I think discussion is enough. It's time to vote. Mr. Stephen Ho, you said what I want to say. If the kid want to buy the video game, that's own choice to make, then of course you have grounds for objection. Well, the DOJ doesn't have a choice what it need to do. That is the overall decision of the government. So for your analogy of buying video games is not applicable. I rarely do vote politically. I heard from some members, if we don't get it out of the way, I want to have the backlog so that you won't touch Article 23. Okay, you know what? Do it. I come down to support you to clear your backlog so as to address the long-standing issue to go legislate Article 23. Just bring it on. I will support you. Mr. Edichu, 3 minutes. So, Mr. Stephen Ho for pointing out the bleeding obvious. I support this motion to adjourn. Not that because it's stated obvious. Well, not quite. I support the adjourn motion. Now that Gary Chan said that the pandemics are forcing the DOJ must undertake that it won't touch Article 23. Of course, they won't promise that. They don't have the authority to do so. But please don't mistake, it's just not because she's not answering question that's removed this adjournment motion. That in last meeting, at the beginning of the last meeting, after he touched on the subject and looked through the paper, I think the DOJ couldn't quite explain why you put down the national anthem law as one of your major legislative exercise. I think you haven't answered whether you need to add an extra manpower where is related to preparation for Article 23 legislation. On this, I agree with the chairman that those DOJ persons who are with us today are not in position to answer. However, maybe the higher up will be in a position to answer, and maybe at a higher level of security Bureau, for example, the Secretary for Security or Carrie Lam herself. So it's not, well, drafting law is not buying an extra pen or two. It had become a political debate. So why not we show our positions and say why or why not? And we actually put the question back to those who are in a position to comment on Article 23 on this particular position, so as to dispel any concern and come back. I believe that most members will not have too much concern about helping the division speeding up its work. So on this circumstance, I support this motion to adjourn. Dr. Junius Ho. I think the more we debate, the more confused we get. However, they admit to one thing. We have no authority to limit the law draftments after we add the new DLD that will not allow to touch a particular piece of legislation. If you ask the Security Secretary or so on, they will not, let's say, reach an agreement. Upon creating this position, I will not touch 23. This have no legal basis. I think it over the line. It's not even right to ask this question. And now that you're so frustrated and accusing and not explaining too clearly, well, the draftsman only reply on matters concerned to her. And ask Carrie Lam or the Secretary for Justice whether this DLD will help with Article 23. What if the answer is that it's possible? Well, if I just hired a civil servant to sit here and eat, see, Article 23 is just a matter of time. Without a timetable, if we get on with it, what's wrong with it? We shouldn't confuse the focus. And James Cho is suddenly like Columbus is covering America. The law draftman is a technical professional for drafting bills. Whatever bills is sent as a matter of policy, that's her job, that's her task. Article 3 is one of the tasks, also a constitutional duty. However, it's not related to this creation, to this post. Thank you for bringing this up. Even the draftsman said replies as is possible. I will still support. And for para 24 and 28, he made it clear enough the workload is huge in the past decade or so. The number of pages have been rising. It's too complex. It's just telling you not enough manpower. And they are screaming for help. And you reply that you're not allowed to touch 23. They don't even have time to touch on it. And even if they ask for the 2 DLD, I will say yes. I object to this adjournment motion. Virginia Yip. I think the DOJ gave a terrible response when members asked you whether for more resources available, they will allow you to get onto Article 23. You should just reply, I'm always ready for it. Article 23 is a constitutional duty. If the Carrie Lam, the CEO executive said yes, okay, I wish the DOJ the wishes prevail. I object to this motion to adjourn. That question was from member Yip Kin Yun. Any other members wish to speak? Mr. Alohe, 1 minute to reply. Can I start now? First, I would like to thank the members who have spoken on this motion. I would like to respond to Mr. Gary Chan because he cared a lot about the backlog of torture claims. While this position on the civil litigation unit is not responsible for torture claims, even creating this post not helping with that. That's why I object things going to the FC. And second, on the question of workload, the DOJ said that they want to be the good daughter-in-law and claim that they want to some more people to share responsibility. But let's rewind. Since 1998, the establishment hasn't changed. And shouldn't they at least own up for exploiting their colleagues and crushing the wage law, then come to FC? They should admit their mistakes. They shouldn't take advantage of their colleagues. We have to think about whether creating this position have merits. And now put this motion to vote that this FC have decided to adjourn this FCR 2018-19. The bell will ring for 3 minutes. Mr. Sheikh, after all this, and now we vote to adjourn. I don't see that how two camps will come with a solution. I suggest, after voting on the German debate, we shall put this to a vote. We should not let him speak any longer. Not that we want to do that. I think this is about time. Your observation is correct because it's been over 3 hours. Even if we get more time, that we're going to be veering off topic on.
唔係，仲有人要問嘅，但係都一兩個啫。問
I think there are still a couple more questions from members, and then we can put the item to vote.
何君堯議員，你會
Dr. Junius Ho, do you still have questions? No.
好，首先提一提大家咧，我即將
I'd like to remind members that we are going to vote on whether we want to adjourn the proceedings of this item.
好啦，現在開始表決。
Voting begins. Voting is closed. Results are displayed. 13 in favor, 35 against, 5 abstentions. This is negative. Are there any other members who would like to ask questions? If not, I'll now like to put paper FCR 2018 to 1973 to vote. I've already drawn the line. Would anyone like to claim a division? If not, yes? Yes, okay, the bell will ring for 5 minutes.
打5分鐘。打5分鐘表決鐘。見完就翻咗嚟喎。 大家我即將投票咧，係咪支持？
We are going to vote on whether we create two Principal Government Counsel posts, one each in the Civil Division and the Law Drafting Division.
好啦，現在開始表決。
Voting begins. Voting is closed. Results are displayed. 36 in favor, 14 against, 4 abstentions. The item is approved. Let's move on to the next item, FCL 2018-1974. Members invited to approve a new commitment of 360.8 million to support the effective operation of the Hong Kong Examinations and Assessment Authority for 4 years from September 1st, 2018 to August 31st, 2022. We have the following to attend today's meeting: Mr. Kevin Leung, Secretary for Education, and his team. May I now invite Mr. Pecuniary, Chairman of the Panel of Education, to give a verbal report. First of all, may I wish you all a Happy New Year. On the December 7th meeting on the Panel of Education, we discussed on approving this one-off funding support to enable the HKEAA to sustain the administration of the HKDSE examination. Members suggested to review the operation model of the DSE examination, which has always been experiencing losses, and then to look at the operating expenses, and then to try to think of ways to reduce cost, etc. We also approved 2 items. We call upon the administration to consider using a recurrent funding model to support the students so as to reduce their financial burden. And written submissions from the administration has already been sent to all members. First, Mr. Ray Chan. Thank you. On December 7th, which is the meeting on the Panel of Education last year, I moved a motion requiring the government to provide a direct subsidy to the schools for each candidate sitting for the exam, and that was supported by the Education Bureau. Administration also understands that the current model cannot sustain the continuous operation of the HKEAA and making it difficult to sustain the administration of the exam, and the situation will just aggravate. Has any measure been made for the sustainability of the HKEAA? Do you have a timetable showing when a sustainable model can be decided upon? And the motion that was passed in the meeting, would that be considered as an option as well? On the day of the meeting, as the DSE is actually internationally recognized exam, therefore non-locals can also sit for the exams. But as there's only a very small percentage of non-locals, and so requiring additional charges from non-locals would be difficult. But actually this is a matter of principle. Right now, the exam is subsidized by the HKEAA. If a one-off funding is made to sustain the HKEAA and you do not require additional fees from non-locals, and that means you are subsidizing other students from abroad. because for other exams, non-locals have to pay more. You can see that model in many other countries. Can you also adjust the fees to be paid by non-Hong Kong ID holders? Then you could charge a higher fee to ensure that public money will not be used to finance non-locals taking the exam. Secretary, well, there's not much time, so I will try to address this question as best as I can. Well, first we need to look into how to sustain the HKEAA to continue to administer the DSE. And the second question is, should the government fund and support all students sitting for the exams? In the paper, we have already said that we have a 4-year timetable. We hope to be able to resolve this question or this situation in 4 years to try to make sure that there will not be a loss. And if we are to make this a recurrent funding, how to take this forward? Members did ask about this, and we can consider whether we should really provide support to all students. But for non-local candidates, well, we will consider in the 4 years we are going to sustain the same model used currently, because the HKEAA decides how much to charge, but they would approach us every year on the fees. Well, since there are not many non-locals, we haven't decided on how much more to charge them. But we have decided that we are going to retain the same model, which is that everyone will be charged the same in the 4 years. Secretary, I agree. Well, if the government is paying, then of course the government shouldn't be paying for non-local candidates. Well, you said there wouldn't be any change to the model in the coming 4 years, but this is still government money. Chairman, may I supplement? Well, we could put it this way. The DSE is actually sustained by other examinations. Well, the non-locals are actually not really under the cost of the government. You can see that there are other examinations that can override the cost. Well, I support in principle providing 360 million to support the HKEAA, but I have to follow up with a question that HKEAA being supported by public money and such an important authority, that there is a lack of transparency in its operations. The HKDSE for our Chinese and liberal studies, we look at the output other than looking at just the paper. Then you would see how the society, the teachers and students all view these subjects. I myself come from the education sector. For liberal studies, every time we see a public exam paper, once we've criticized something, then the next year those questions would be taken out of the exam, and then they would put it back in a few years later. So I always have to follow up on the appropriate questions. I understand that, yes, there must be confidentiality in paper setting. For some countries, the paper setters would work behind closed doors for a month. We understand. But you have to understand that there's huge criticism for certain subjects. I have mentioned quite a few times why the required questions must be maintained in the paper of liberal studies. Why do you have to force the students to answer those questions? And if they don't do so, then they would not pass. And there are some questions that are not suitable for secondary school students. I remember a question asking about the relationship between democratic index and economic development. I asked the students how they fared in the exam, and many of them said, well, they just learn how to reply. They don't really understand the question. I think we should review the model. Should there be required questions? Why can't students choose? Or why can't they have some options? We have someone from the HKEAA here. Can you actually listen to the views of the public? Or maybe you're new to this post. Dr. So, can...
Thank you for the question. When setting questions, the Hong Kong EAA will make reference of the assessment and an examination guideline, which is set by experts. So we have to take the curriculum and assessment guideline when we set questions, and in the process we have to collect stakeholders' views and take them into account when setting questions for the next year. So what Ms. Leung said are naturally included. And as I've said, that we have to take into account the guideline, and if there are any major changes, then they will have to go through discussions by experts. We still follow the assessment guideline. We think that it addresses the views of stakeholders. What Ms. Leung said will be taken into account. Well, I have talked to ex-members. They said that is like their own turf, and they don't really accept views from the outsides. I think it's a major difficulty. The Hong Kong EAA is of the view that what they do is best, and they ignore the views of everyone, including students. I think you will have to reflect public's view to the Hong Kong EAA and ask for improvement. Well, I will adjourn to have a break.